Recognize our witnesses for 5 minutes to provide summaries of their testimony. Their full written remarks will be submitted for the record. Representative Luria, you're recognized.
Thank you to Leader Jeffries, Representative Thompson, and my former colleagues from the Select Committee. I'm grateful to be back in the Capitol. But unfortunately, what brings us together today is the somber remembrance that 5 years ago, the Capitol and our democratic process were under attack by a mob summoned by President Donald Trump. As a retired naval officer who served 2 decades in uniform, I first took the oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, at the age of 17 when I entered the United States Naval Academy as a midshipman. And then again as a member of Congress, as we all do. My service has been to this country and to the Constitution. My focus this morning will be what the Select Committee exposed about Donald Trump's failure to uphold his oath, which states to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and his dereliction of duty as Commander-in-Chief, and furthermore, how this has persisted during his second term in office. President Trump's failure to act to end the violence that day, his rewriting and whitewashing of history, and his mass pardons of January 6 rioters, literally transforming hundreds of convicted and violent criminals into political martyrs and folk heroes, has served to undercut the rule of law and in turn weakened our democratic institutions. Veterans of our armed services know firsthand the leadership that is required in a time of crisis, urgent and decisive action that puts the country first. But on January 6th, when lives and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump, as Commander-in-Chief, refused to act because of his selfish desire to stay in power. Think about what we saw on January 6th. Undeniable violence at the Capitol, the Vice President being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service, senators running through the hallways to escape the mob, law enforcement valiantly defending the Capitol against brutal attack. As Commander-in-Chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol. But for over 3 hours, as Adam and I in our hearing described in detail, for 187 minutes, he disregarded the advice and pleas from his closest staff and his own family members to take action, to simply speak the words necessary to stop the violence and send the rioters home. And furthermore, when he spoke, he addressed those who instigated the violence with words of solidarity. He said, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt." He doubled down on the stolen election claims and then finally said, "I know how you feel, but go home and go in peace." President Trump also bears responsibility for the extreme delay in the D.C. National Guard arriving at the Capitol until after the violence had largely subsided. The D.C. National Guard is unique. It answers directly to the president. Senior Guard leaders have since testified that President Trump could have expedited the Guard's deployment with a single phone call. Instead, the Guard waited for hours, despite being positioned merely blocks away at the D.C. Armory. Rather than act, President Trump watched the chaos unfold on television from his private West Wing dining room. He made no call to deploy the Guard. Instead, he watched the attacks on Vice President Pence and justified the mob's hang Mike Pence chants as common sense. The Guard arrived 3 hours and 19 minutes after being requested, well after the worst of the violence had already occurred. We'll never know how many law enforcement officers might have been spared their brutal injuries, or how many lives might have been saved had the Commander-in-Chief done his duty in the moment when it mattered the most. What we do know is that it was an outrageous dereliction of duty and a profound violation of President Trump's oath of office. President Trump has re-scripted the norms of government service to require personal loyalty over loyalty to the Constitution. Our military leadership has resisted this and has held firm despite ever-increasing pressure. Yet President Trump continues to blur the lines between the duty of the military to the Constitution and his political aims. Days after losing the 2020 presidential election, President Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper for this very reason, insufficient personal loyalty. This was an extraordinary action by a lame duck president during a presidential transition that alarmed national security professionals on both sides of the aisle. Secretary Esper had resisted Trump's efforts to use the active duty military forces for domestic political purposes. He opposed invoking the Election Act to deploy troops to American streets during protests. He counseled against Trump's suggestions that troops should just shoot protesters. Since resuming office, President Trump has again politicized the armed forces, opening a baseless investigation into the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. He and his administration purged senior military leadership and fired the service branch's top lawyers, simply deeming them roadblocks. He threatened to recall a sitting U.S. senator to active duty to be tried for claims of sedition under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is an extraordinary step to weaponize DOD against a member of the legislative branch. He has described fellow Americans as the enemy within, suggested the military straighten out American cities, and even proposed using American communities as military training grounds. These statements coincided with troop deployments to American cities over the objections of state and local leaders, and with a systematic effort to muzzle the Pentagon reporting by restricting press access to the Pentagon unless pre-approved by the administration. As someone who served in the military and in uniform for 2 decades, I find this vision for our military deeply un-American. President Trump did not only attack this building and our democracy, he attacked the fundamental idea that the military serves the Constitution, not a man, not a party, and not a political agenda. This trend has only accelerated since his explicit display of dereliction of duty on January 6th, and should stand as a warning to all Americans that living in a free democracy is not self-executing. It depends on leaders and citizens choosing to uphold our values. We owe it to the law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol, those serving in uniform today, and the generations to come to lead that fight. And this is one that I will never abandon. Thank you.